an annual joint military exercise between the United States and South Korea. While it's officially framed as defensive, these games are anything but defensive. The whole point is to demonstrate strength at the cost of the people who live there. Some of the drills they practice are dropping nuclear weapons on the peninsula, invading North Korea, and firebombing the countryside. These war games are a poor disguise to hide the US's intentional escalation. Beyond military control, the US also exerts economic pressure through tariffs and sanctions. While sanctions against North Korea are framed as punishing the government, in reality they harm ordinary people, restricting access to medicine, food, and basic necessities. The US also uses trade policies to keep South Korea economically dependent, ensuring it remains a compliant ally in their larger imperialist strategy. Poverty is manufactured in Korea by the United States. We see the same thing being done domestically. Our struggles are interconnected. And then onto the next section. Korean resistance. Now that we've discussed US militarism and its effects on Korea, let's talk about the bigger picture: national liberation and people's democracy, and how these struggles have shaped Korea's past and present. So, up there, self-reliance, that's Shea. It's a Korean character that translates to self-reliance, versus American liberalism. And so this represents the National Liberation Party and the People's Democracy Party, which are two major political movements in Korea today. So national liberation prioritizes self-reliance, juche, and self-determination, aiming to expel external forces, primarily US imperialism, so that the Korean people can determine their own future. On the other hand, PD, or the People's Democracy, focuses on addressing internal struggles such as workers' rights, anti-dictatorship resistance, human rights, and social welfare. However, over time, PD has increasingly aligned with Western-style liberalism and social democracy, influenced by American political frameworks. Meanwhile, NL remains rooted in left-wing nationalism, blending ethnic nationalism, reunification efforts, and social progressivism. This divergence has shaped contemporary Korean politics, often creating tensions between those advocating for systematic changes through reformist policies, and those calling for a more radical break from imperialist and neoliberal structures. But we know more than ever that our liberation will not come from collaboration with this imperialist force. The US government only cares for its oligarchy. We must fight for Korean sovereignty and for the US to leave Korea, for the US to be out of everywhere. I think that we can see this even more now in Korea, as there's no unified government, no elected official representing South Korea, and yet the military games still persist. They called for a stop after the Pocheon bombing, the mayor of Pocheon, and the government has not stopped. In fact, the war games started on March 10th and are still going on, with plans to continue the war games in summer. So there's a long history of resistance in Korea. Korea has a deep history of student and worker activism. In the mid to late 1980s, students led the charge against military dictatorship under the Unified National Liberation People's Democratic Revolution. So that was the NLPDR, before the split in ideologies. But even before that, we saw mass uprisings. So the April Revolution in 1960, which was the photo from the first page. The newspaper in this photo references the protest where students organized, together to force the US implanted through rigged elections and military control, first president of the Republic of Korea, Syngman Rhee, to resign, eventually leading to him fleeing South Korea to live out in hiding in the US. Then Gwangju Uprising, 1980. Student-led pro-democracy protests that were violently put down by Chun Doo-hwan and the South Korean military, with estimates of around 2,000 people being killed, regardless of their political beliefs or if they were involved in the uprising or not. And then candlelight protests occurring from 2016 to 2017, when over 15 million people took to the streets to oust disgraced, impeached President Park Geun-hye because of her corruption, abuse of power, and leaking of classified information to gain money. Even now, South Koreans continue to resist. Labor unions, leftist groups, and anti-war activists fight US imperialism, militarization, and neoliberal policies. Elder activists, many of whom lived through the war, dictatorship, and US occupation now, stand alongside students in this ongoing struggle. We have a common enemy. At the same time, we're seeing the rise of far-right groups supporting Yoon and calling for dissenters to be thrown in prison, including the people who are prosecuting him. They are fueled by Trump's rhetoric in the US, often incorporating slogans and statements from Trump in English into their protests and prompts. These groups are growing in South Korea and among the Korean diaspora, creating a political crisis that threatens democracy and fuels militarization. Our common enemy is US imperialism. Korea's fight is not just Korea's fight. It is part of a global struggle against imperialism, militarism, and fascism. If we want to change, we must stand in solidarity with others resisting US domination across the world. Thank you.
US-led war, Portland chapter.